the purpose of a literary agent? Could you not go to the publishing house directly?
Sure, Alex.
No, you can, but you really, I think that you should use the channels that have been set up because they're there for a really, really good reason. I started out in Hollywood reading as a story analyst, and I was one of the first lines of defense for all the people who buy. There's so much crap that gets submitted to all these people, first to the agents and also to the publishers. And what the agents do for the publishers is that they know the editors, they know what their taste is, they know what they're buying, they know what slots they need to fill for their publishing house. So an agent has a relationship with an editor and can say, call them up and say, I have a book that I think you're really going to like, and mean it. That relationship is really gold, because then the editors don't have to wade through as much of the crap that they have to, which is just overwhelming. I mean, in Hollywood and New York too, they can take these manuscripts away in warehouse. I mean, they use forklifts to move them. And you want to be not one of those, you know, little manuscripts at the bottom of the forklift pile. You want to be the one on the editor's desk that they're excited about because your agent has said, I know you're going to love this. And they don't say that unless they mean it, because that burns their relationship. It's really important to have that door right into the, you know, the front of that editor's desk, because you only get one shot with your book, really. Once it goes out to all the places, there aren't that many places that buy. Once those people have read it, you're done. That book is over until you sell something else, and then everyone wants everything that you've ever done, right? So don't really, don't underestimate the power of an agent, and Stacey is absolutely right. You need to have the right agent. You have to do your research about agents before you even think about going to a publisher.
And I knew that my agent, the one that Alex and I both have, was the right one for me when he said, I took your manuscript home with me over the weekend. I never do that. And I said, you're my boy.
Yeah.
Well, there used to be what they called the slush pile, which is where all the unsolicited manuscripts were piled, and then some unlucky junior editor had to go read through it and hope to, you know, sort the diamonds from the dung, as it were. But they just got too big. They just got so many people, so many of these unsolicited manuscripts were pouring in that there weren't enough junior editors to go around in the publishing houses. Now the big houses, if you send them an unsolicited manuscript, a lot of them won't even open it. They'll return it to you unopened, and because they're afraid that if something similar comes out in 6 months, that you're going to sue them for stealing their book. So you really do need an agent. Agents are now the gatekeepers.
Now, the exception to that would be if you have gone to conferences like we're going to talk about, you've met an editor who has specifically asked for something that you've talked to them about. That's a good reason to do it, but you would still want an agent to negotiate your deal. But if it's a smaller house and you're not looking for a big publishing deal, and you've met someone that you think is absolutely perfect, then of course you would want to pursue that relationship. But you really need to know what you're doing going in. Don't just once you're finished, your work really starts, because you have to do a lot of research to get that book to the right people, to get it. We want to be published, right? It's finishing the book is just the first step. So make sure that you're prepared before you do any kind of submission, and we'll try to help you with that, right?
That said, I do want to try to steer the conversation back and forth between the business and the craft of writing. I don't want this to just turn into an infomercial on how to get agents. These guys are writers, and they have really earned their chops. How many screenplays did you write, Alex, before you sold The Heroine?
Oh, well, I worked as a screenwriter for more than 10 years. So I've written dozens of screenplays for money. I've been hired, you know, I've sold original work. I've been hired to do novel adaptations. I've been hired on assignment by all of the studios except Universal. Never worked for Universal, but that was my living. And and all that time I only had one movie made, and that's why I snapped and wrote a novel. I was just tired of doing all of that work and never actually coming to an actual conclusion. It's sort of like, well, I could use a sexual metaphor now, but you probably see where I'm going. But yeah, I was working on assignment. I was making a great living, living in Los Angeles and working with really great people. It's a fun thing to do. But I was really creatively frustrated, so while I was working on assignment for the director of Armageddon, I was going home and writing an hour a night on my novel, and that's how I wrote my first novel.
One of the things that I found in talking with agents and editors, particularly sending out queries, which I presume a lot of folks here are going to probably do and have done, is I get a lot of responses saying, this is a good plot, but the character really didn't grab me. If I've seen one thing in Dusty's work, particularly in Safe and Sound, is Jack is an emotionally complex character. So steering it back towards craft, how do you go about drawing a character like Jack? Where do you get that from?
Well, Jack just sort of grew in the telling. I mean, he originally started off in the second, what became the second scene of Devil's Right Hand is just this guy standing in a strip club talking to one of the dancers trying to find someone. And I started spinning out at that point, okay, why? And it's just something that popped into my head while I was at a friend of mine's bachelor party, which I was actually in a strip club. Yeah, it's a story my wife loves when he loves to tell. And of course, that's one of the things about being a writer is you try to turn everything into fiction. It's one of the sort of dysfunctional things about being a writer is everything you see, you think, where can I put this into a story? But so that's how he started. He was just this sort of cipher. There was nothing. He was just this guy. I knew he had to be sort of a tough guy because he was hunting. He was a hunter. I knew that. He was hunting something. And then so that sort of spun out from there. I knew he was going to be a tough guy, but the tougher a guy is, the more vulnerabilities, or the stronger vulnerability you've got to give him. I always call it the kryptonite. Your tough guy's got to have some kryptonite. He's got to have Superman without kryptonite would be tremendously boring because he'd be invincible. So you've got to give him a weakness. You've got to give him, and so that was where the post-traumatic stress disorder came in because I'd worked in the field of law for several years, and I'd known a lot of people, clients who had post-traumatic stress disorder, which was sort of the root of a lot of their problems. And so that was sort of Jack's kryptonite. And from there, you just sort of, I knew a lot about that particular disorder and the people that it affects, and that sort of spun out from there. So he was a tough guy with a vulnerability. And then I had to try to get him, again, send him on some sort of journey where he was trying to overcome that. So that's sort of how the character began, and it just sort of grew in the telling.
There's a bit of I don't know if luck is the word, but shared values is probably more accurate in how, when you sold that manuscript or whenever you introduced it to Scott, your agent, there was a story about Steve Earle. What was the story there?
Well, The Devil's Right Hand, the title of the first book, is the title of a song by Steve Earle, who's one of my absolute favorite artists. He's been typed as a country artist, but he was sort of too rock and roll for country and too country for the rock and roll stations. But he writes these wonderful story songs that are just fantastic little 3 or 4 minute movies. And as it turns out, my agent, Scott, was a huge Steve Earle fan. Also a big Bruce Springsteen fan, which I also am. So we started connecting over music almost immediately. So that's what really got his attention first, because he knew the song, The Devil's Right Hand, which is about basically people who live by the gun and what that does to them. So that was sort of a connection that was made. And that's the sort of lucky break that's sort of required, to find an agent, to find a publisher. You've got to find someone who connects with what you're doing.
And it's a taste thing. I mean, I have the same kind of story with my film agent. It seems so random, but it's not. I wrote it, my first script was called, at the time, Only the Lonely, after that song. And when I had the script on submission to a bunch of agents, and when I called Frank, because I was returning his call, he like, usually you don't get this from an agent, but he's going, Alex Sokoloff, I woke up this morning to Only the Lonely, you know, on the radio. And seriously, I mean, and he was serious. So synchronicity is important to these people. And I say this story on top of Dusty's because they're just people. And what they do is they represent things that they love, that they think they can get someone else to love. So you really want you want to find someone who has that kind of magical fit with you, because that's a person who can take you where you want to be. And
to carry the synchronicity, it's just too good of a story not to tell. I had a manuscript under consideration with a very small startup publisher based out of Denver, and the editor from that publisher was in New York at this conference this past weekend, and I happened to be on a panel that was talking about things like synchronicity, and so I gave this example from my own life. It has a lot to do with dates. My wife was born on November 13th, 1973, and the gal that I dated prior to my wife happened to be born on the exact same date. You know, it's just one of those things. Of course, the two people that I've actually dated in my life being born on the exact same day means a lot to me. It's a meaningful coincidence. A couple of hours later, the editor was in the actual meeting. A few hours later, he came up to me and he said, "I just wanted to let you know, my birthday is November 13th."